If your feminism does not also extend to trans women, I hate to break it to you, but you are not practicing feminism. You are still practicing misogyny, and you are under the rule of a colonial mindset when it comes to what makes a woman, and you are just masking it as saying that you are all for girl power.
Okay, folks, how have we arrived at this point? Well, let's take a little look at the history of feminism. Feminism broadly is split into three waves. Some people say there's a fourth wave, so we're going to split fourth into third and fourth. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Really, it's three waves. First wave feminism. If you're from my country, the UK, you'll be very familiar with the story of Emmeline Pankhurst, who stopped at nothing to improve the plight of women. Now, the one that most people know about is the fact that they weren't allowed to vote. Well, that changed. And of course, the reason she's pictured here, Pankhurst is pictured here in front of a horse, is she threw herself in front of a horse in protest and died. It shocked the country and it spurred change. Now look, things weren't great for women in this time. They were also not amazing for, poor men either. There were very few people that lived at this time where things were exceptionally good. So votes. The next thing on my list here is property rights for married women. Interestingly, under English common law, when a woman married, her legal identity was absorbed into her husband's. So she couldn't own property of her own, she couldn't keep her wages, she couldn't enter contracts independently, and her husband had legal control of her assets. She also couldn't be sued. So it wasn't all bad, but it was pretty bad. It also gave women access to higher education. It gave them eligibility to stand for parliament and true legal recognition as political citizens. Nobody in their right mind would argue against any of these things. Clearly, it was right for these things to happen. And it's why Emmeline Pankhurst is remembered to this day and is taught in schools to this day as being a hero. I think rightly so. But then we move to second wave feminism. Let's take a look at that. Second wave feminism occurred 1960s to 1980s. Things have moved on from the first wave, and yeah, it's fair to say that actually we have here a woman saying, no, actually you can't slap my backside as I walk through the office. That's a fairly reasonable demand. We want equal pay. I mean, look, that is a reasonable demand. The question is, to what extent are the jobs always equal? There's a difference between a bricklayer and an HR worker, for example, but that's a different debate. Let's just say equal job, equal pay, fair enough. No harassment at the workplace, that's obviously fair enough. Access to all careers. Look, there were some jobs that weren't open to women. What separates the second wave from the first wave, though, is this is the beginning of gender theory, gender ideology. We start to hear these phrases, gender is a social construct. It's the beginning of things like the patriarchy. The idea that society is systemically structured in a way to benefit men and that men simply subordinate women. This is also the beginning of women ditching ideals and ambitions of motherhood in favour of a corporate career. I think one of the biggest lies we've ever told women is that the pursuit of a corporate career is a more noble one than motherhood. It isn't. And it's also where we see the beginnings of my body, my choice, and abortion is empowerment. So what we see with second wave feminism is the beginnings of resentment towards men. And look, it's not entirely without merit. Women did have to put up with stuff they shouldn't have had to have put up with. But also at the same time, the spawning of this ideology, the idea that children are a burden and that they're going to get in the way of you climbing the corporate ladder. Academia embracing, among other fashionable nonsense, gender ideology, patriarchy ideology, and the really rather strange shift from abortion being something that should be safe, which, I don't think many people would argue there should be unsafe. I mean, the thing is, if you think that abortion should be completely outlawed, it's like drugs. You can desire to outlaw them as much as you like, but people are still going to do them. And then the question is it better that people buy them from the black market where there's no oversight into quality? or do you make them legal? Different debate, not one we're going to get into here, but the same applies to abortion. You can make it illegal, but it won't end abortions. People will still get abortions. So based on that, I'm not against abortion being legal. What I find strange, though, what I find odd, is this cultural acceptance that abortion is a form of empowerment for women, and that abortion should even be celebrated, encouraged, which brings me on to phase 3 and 4. Third, fourth wave feminism is when things start to go batshit crazy and we end up with videos like the one we just watched. By this point, the ideological explosion is out of control. And it's not just with gender, it's with all of the other fashionable nonsense, critical race theory, white privilege, all that crap. The academic departments have just bloated and grown without their ideas being in any way exposed to rigor and test. Students get angrier. They don't know why they're angry, really. They live in the most secure, prosperous, fair time humanity has ever known. But they've all been persuaded that somehow they're a victim and that they're oppressed. And they do lavish in that idea. So there they are, angrily studying their patriarchy theory, and that gender's a construct and language is reality. Words equal violence. This is one of the hallmarks of third, fourth wave feminism. But adjacent to that, we have the absurdity, which is what our friend was talking about in the video just there. Women can have penises. Think of our first wave feminists. Think of our Emmeline Pankhursts that died for women's rights. Even our second wave, where it's 50-50. 50% good, 50% probably not that great. But still, at least you can say for the first and second wave, the most important consideration is the woman, the biological woman. Third, fourth wave feminism, biological men can be women. Men can give birth. Pointing this stuff out equals a punch in the face, sometimes literally. And then we have the consequences of this ideology, where in the real world, infrastructure jobs, vocations that are the very foundations upon which civilization stands, are overwhelmingly filled by men. Workplace fatalities are 90+% men. But in the nice, air-conditioned office culture occupations that stand on the backs of these men, they're filled to the rafters with people that have absorbed this ideology. I say people because it's not just women. It's feminized men that are just as bad when it comes to propagating this bullshit. Men are told constantly that they are part of a culture of toxic masculinity. We're expected to believe with a straight face that the empowerment of women contains examples of OnlyFans models that are considered entrepreneurs. They have been taught by this wave of feminism that selling naked pictures of themselves is akin to empowerment. But here's the real kicker. We are aborting 278,000 babies a year in England and Wales. We've got a declining indigenous population problem. We aren't reproducing at the rate we need to be. Well, we've aborted nearly 1 million kids in 3 years, or we will have done by the end of this year. Is that something to celebrate? Is it?
Women are part of the conversation when talking about feminism 100% of the time, because trans women experience all of the things that we experience times 10. If you are not for all women, specifically trans women, you cannot call yourself a feminist.
Okay, the virtue signaling here is off the absolute Richter. And to understand it, a little while ago, I put this together. This is the virtue signaling point system. People can earn VSPs, virtue signaling points, by rising up the virtue signal intensity level on the left-hand side here. This woman that we just heard from is straight up at number 7. Men can give birth, women have penises, trans women are women. It's complete denial of observable, shared reality, but it's not the only level. There's 7 in total. So the first level, I mean, look, The first level is what I call passive tolerance. It's kind of, we all kind of engage in a bit of passive tolerance. Let's say you've been invited to a dinner party and you've got somebody with blue hair at the table and they've got septum nose rings and, you know, they're wearing clothes that don't fit them. But the person whose house you're at is a like close family friend maybe, or family, and they're the nutcase with the blue or green hair is spouting all sorts of fashionable nonsense out. Do you engage them? Do you engage them there and then, or do you just enter a little bit of level 1 virtue signaling and just say, hey man, you know, live and let live, be kind? Some people will be like, engage them always. I'll do a video where I actually break down each of these in more detail, but suffice to say for now, this nutcase is as high as you can possibly get on the virtue signaling point system, which is what it's about. This is what these people, this is all they care about. How much virtue signaling can they engage in? It's the economics of virtue signaling that allows them to vie for status among their peers. That's why I call it virtuenomics.